You're listening to Autumn on the Air, the weekly podcast that brings you conversations about the impact of research commercialization and the people who make it happen. Join us for interviews with patent and licensing professionals, innovators, entrepreneurs, and tech transfer leaders on the issues and trends that matter most. Keep listening for an inside track on the people, IP policies, and politics changing our world.
Welcome to Autumn on the Air. Today we're joined by Steven Lehmann, Managing Director of Stargaze at Portal Innovations, and Ashish Uppala, Head of Engineering and Product for Stargaze. Steve brings over a decade of experience in venture building and university innovation ecosystems, having led the University of Chicago's $20 million pre-seed fund and authored the Innovation Ecology Substack. Ashish, a former CEO of scite.ai and an AI and machine learning expert, combines technical prowess in meta-science with a passion for mapping biotech innovation. Together, they'll unpack how Stargaze's AI-powered tool is helping universities navigate funding challenges by uncovering hidden opportunities in their research ecosystems. Welcome to the podcast, Steve and Ashish.
Hi, Lisa. Thanks for having us on.
Thank you. It's good to be a part of this.
Well, I'm really excited to have the two of you on the podcast today. And I thought the best place to start the podcast is maybe with you, Steve, and that's with the big picture. Tell us what Stargaze is and how it redefines how universities map and monetize their innovation ecosystems.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. I think that the best way to frame what Stargaze is and why we built it is in the context of Portal, where Ashish and I work. So Portal's been around for about 5 years, and our goal has been to build the infrastructure that's necessary to commercialize innovation in geographies that are over-scienced, but perhaps underfunded or don't have the infrastructure to take those innovations to market. And so we've been building that over the last number of years, expanded it to a number of different cities and university ecosystems as well, putting together physical infrastructure, early stage capital, and networks of people to help create that infrastructure to get academic ideas from the aha moment in the lab to a Series A investment and beyond. And while we've been building that infrastructure, one of the questions that's animated us is, how do you find the scientists and the science to plug into that infrastructure? And so we started tinkering around with some ideas about 3.5 years ago. And as we started to build conviction and also get people calling us to ask, what are you building? How does this work? Can we have a go? We decided that we would put a name to it, turn it into a product and release it. And so we have this tool called Stargaze now. The way that I think about Stargaze is almost as a Google Maps for innovation. So if you think about how Google Maps works, underneath the app that you use, there's a really rich map of landscape that you're trying to navigate. And that's a map that's been built up from all sorts of different data types through many different years. But it's a really simple app to use. All you have to do is flip it on. There's a GPS that tells you exactly where you are on that map. It tells you what's around you. And then you tell it where you want it to go, and it takes you there. It gets better over time as other people use it, because you can start to see where other people are moving around, and it's going to make more efficient route maps. So you can think about Stargaze essentially in that same way. We build rich maps of biotech ecosystems. So instead of streets and street signs and whatnot, you've got patents, papers, funding sources, ontologies around diseases, the areas of interest for pharmaceutical groups, all that sort of stuff. Instead of a GPS to find where you're located, we use current AI technologies that build on the transformer technology that was originally invented by Google that eventually became LLMs. And then we use a combination of network science and reasoning models to help route you, given our understanding of that map of innovation and then where your location is. And so, we give this to universities. We started using this ourselves internally. And then we started exploring for universities, how can we help them better surface the innovators within their ecosystem and then route those innovators to the appropriate sources of funding or partnership. That could be non-dilutive or dilutive sources of funding. It could be partners that range from VC firms to pharmaceutical companies to other industry partners to foundations. And so that this technology that we built is really extensible, and it helps both scouts and innovators find their place in that innovation ecosystem and then get to where they want to go.
Wow, that's really incredible. I'm curious, what has the response been from the universities that have tried Stargaze?
So often there's two things that universities will often point to. The first is that Stargaze helps them get beyond the usual suspects. So, when you're thinking about entering into an ecosystem, hey, Eli Lilly's coming to town. Who should we introduce them to? Oh, we heard about this funding opportunity. Who should apply? All these different, potential connections. Universities always go to their usual suspects. And if you've worked in a university, you know that the university's picture of innovation and the innovators internally is, always evolving. And it's really hard to keep track of all the innovation relay races that are happening on a university campus. So Stargaze helps with that. And by doing that, it also helps them move from more of a reactive posture to a proactive posture, whether that's, connecting folks, whether that's saying, hey, who should we fund with a proof of concept grant, to, again, who should we introduce to a VC or a pharmaceutical company that's on campus, or, who should we connect at bio? These types of questions.
Now, Ashish, I want to turn to you for a second, because Stargaze is described as a biotech hypergraph that models patents, grants, and startups. Talk to us a little bit about how your AI models process disparate data sources to predict commercialization potential.
It's a good question. And actually, before I dive into it, the one thing I want to add to what Steve said earlier about the university response, I spent the last 4 years building tools to sell to universities and libraries. And oftentimes, what you learn building and selling products into that segment is there's a very different response when someone thinks you have a kind of a cool, shiny tool versus you're striking a chord and just nailing it. And, everything Steve said is true. And I would actually go past that and say that it's almost like there's like a sigh of relief that someone out there is just like paying attention to the problems that they actually have and that they're dealing with in the day to day. And so it's been very rewarding to see that. To your other question about predicting commercial potential. So, I will say our messaging has changed quite a bit over the last year as the product has taken different shapes and forms, from this internal toolkit to this product, this kind of core network that we're building. I would say that we're not predicting commercial potential as much as equipping innovators and scouts with understanding commercial potential of either the research area that they were trying to work on, whether it's a very specific technology that they have, or a specific person that they're looking at, right? How do you take a look at someone? How do you contextualize the arc of their career, the papers they've published, the phases of their careers, from whether they're maybe exploring different research areas to clearly focusing in on something and exploiting a discovery that they've made? How do you contextualize that in the context of grants they've received or patents they've been awarded, and build a picture of either a person or a group of people to understand the sort of commercial landscape and activity and intent there, to figure out if there's, if you're an investor, if you need to be looking there to invest in, if you're in the Office of Research or Tech Transfer, if there's someone at your university who's doing something really cool, how do you make sure that you can proactively reach out to them and help support them in that process? And so we pull from a lot of public and private data sources to support this. We've been very lucky that there's been this broader push in the open science infrastructure to, it started with the Initiative for Open Citations. You saw infrastructure providers like Crossref, and now you see amazing companies like OpenAlex that are building foundational plumbing for people to build off of publication, scholarly outputs, let's just say that. right? Because they're a bit broader than just research articles. And so there's been a lot of momentum there that we're able to benefit from. And on top of that, we have data that we have also pulled on different startups in different areas. So we know here are different startups in these different spaces. Here are the scientific co-founders for them. Here are the universities that these companies spun out of. And so we've done that sort of semi-manually and now shifting that to a more automatic process. And so we're able to take that and build an overall picture where we link these different, we call them objects or innovation artifacts, to different people. And once you have that information and evidence, we take a series of approaches, depending on if it's a search problem or whatever else, to say, hey, reasoning model, here's what we know about this person. Here's what we know about what they've done. Let's combine that with either, some predictive models we have or some other, what we call our innovation biomarkers, to surface that information in a digestible way for someone.
That's incredible. How many people are working on Stargaze at the current time, given all the different resources and sources that you're pulling information on? And if for our listeners, if you could see the two of them, they're laughing. And I think I know what the answer is.
Okay, so I'm going to count. Steve, do you think of yourself as half, 3/4? What's full-time on Stargaze?
3/4. Yeah, 3/4.
Yeah. All right, so that's 0.75. I'm definitely a 1. And then we recently hired Sammy, who is a machine learning and AI expert out of Paris, who's essentially on a fractional role with us. So that's the core team. And then, of course, we've got a lot of folks at Portal across the venture team who have supported and championed the project internally and really done a lot of the work over the years as well.
We've had really engaged folks from industry helping us kind of steer that product roadmap, from academia, and then academics helping us too.
That's incredible. For essentially, we'll say 3 people. That's incredible.
Well, the decisions are faster to make, so there is that as a nice trade-off.
Definitely faster to make that way. Well, I think everyone is well aware that universities are under tremendous pressure right now, particularly with federal research funding being cut. Harvard's been in the news a lot lately about this. We know universities need alternative revenue streams. Talk to us about how Stargaze helps to identify non-dilutive funding opportunities or industry partnerships that maybe traditional methods might miss.
Do you want to take that one, Ashish?
Yeah.
I can talk about it. I think it's a good question to answer with more of a technical bent.
Yeah, so I will say the core of what Stargaze is doing is organizing the information we are able to find around innovation in a way that we can then feed it into different matching and scoring algorithms. And so in the context of a funding call, right, we might actually say, we're not looking for new grants that we want you to apply for, but hey, this opportunity has come up one way or another. How do you know who to actually reach out to at your institution to recommend to build a team around applying for that grant with a high likelihood of winning? And so part of what we're doing is analyzing the description of the grant call itself to pull out key aspects of it that we think are important. Part of that is generating what we call vector embedding. So how do you represent a bunch of words as numbers so that you can start to say things like these two groups of words are close to each other or far from each other. But then part of it is also a bit of things like topic labeling and topic clustering to build a series of different matching strategies to say these investigators are a very good fit for this kind of a grant call or not. And so when we think about funding opportunities, it's historically been in that direction where something has come in and then we want to find someone to apply for this. And then how do you take that one step further to build a team around it based on their previous collaborations and so on? Now, as we think about investors and so on, and even in this context of a funding opportunity, it's how do you do this essentially in a bi-directional way? So how do you say, my research expertise is in the immune checkpoint blockade for liver cancer, whatever. That was actually my research like 10 years ago. And so how do I find investors who might actually be investing in this space? Well, we've got information on startups, on investors, and on startups that have raised money from investors through a mix of public and private data. And so we're able to use a series of our what we call our deep adaptive search pipelines to find those companies, understand the investment activity around them, and use our reasoning models to say, okay, so here are like the 5 most relevant companies over the last 3 years, and here are the investors who are putting money into the space. And also from the public record, here's what these investors say they're actually interested in. And so based on that overall picture, we have a series of scoring models that'll say, okay, this investor is probably a really good fit if a startup is building in this space or not. Hopefully that answered your question. But that's how we think about finding sort of best fit investigators. It's how do you assemble the information internally so you can actually feed it into the right sort of search and scoring and matching algorithms down the road.
Yeah, really valuable given the way you've designed the algorithms and you assemble all the data. And that leads me to go back to something you said a little bit earlier, Steve, about over-science but underfunded ecosystems. Can you explain a little bit about how Stargaze's innovation biomarkers help universities to prioritize some of their high potential researchers or projects during resource constraints?
Sure. Yeah. So that, maybe I'll take 2 kind of angles to that question. I think the first would just be like how innovation biomarkers can be helpful in an emerging ecosystem. And, as we talked about, like you have this usual suspect problem at a university, or at least challenge, but then you also have the kind of the balkanization problem, or you have the fact that at any university, there's a whole lot of internal organizations, and a university is almost like a collection of different organizations. And so being able to find those really interesting scientists that are working on commercially interesting things is hard. And in a resource-constrained environment, the matching task becomes all the more important. So, if you have all of a sudden, half as much dilutive funding and a quarter as much non-dilutive funding, you better believe that the competition for each one of those dollars is increased in every single one of those calls or potential partnerships or investments. And so, how do you win? Well, you win by finding the razor sharp innovation that directly addresses the thing that's being called for, whether that's coming from pharma or VC or government or foundation. And the chances that matches with one of your usual suspects at a university is just lower. And when you add on the fact that some of the most interesting research happens at collision points, you really need to be able to see into what you're working with at your university in ways that you just can't through the usual suspects approach. And so, when we talk about innovation biomarkers, it's really about just, finding these signals of, hey, these different folks could work together in a really meaningful way on this particular problem. Or this person is developing something that has massive commercial relevance, but they're early in their career, may not be commercially oriented. And so that's how you might come at that problem around, how do you find innovation that fits these different types of calls? When you're to answer the first part of the question around, over-scienced but underfunded or under-infrastructured ecosystems, we look at Chicago, Atlanta, Houston, a lot of the places where we are as those types of places where, if you're walking around in Cambridge, in Kendall Square, you're going to bump into folks. It's just kind of natural that you're going to bump into the folks that you need to take you along your journey. And that's just not the case in most other ecosystems. But innovation is massively diffuse. It's very, very diffuse. It's not centralized in those core nodes. And so Stargaze helps you find where that innovation is and then match it to the folks that can help carry that baton forward towards commercialization.
The one thing I'd say is that oftentimes when we talk about these or hear about these, it sounds like we're saying, okay, we're just going to give you a list of people, right? And I think one of the core sort of design or founding principles for the product, really in service of someone at the university or working on these innovation ecosystems who is resource constrained, is how do you give them a list that they believe, and how does the tool show its work in that process? So one, they actually trust it, but two, if they actually have to go boots on the ground and reach out to someone, they're armed with the right information to actually like successfully complete that transaction, if you will.
Now, Ashish, I want to stay with you for a second because I want to go back to a point we made earlier about all the data, whether it's from patents, grants, clinical trials that Stargaze integrates. How do you handle interoperability challenges with all this data, and what safeguards do you have to help ensure privacy for sensitive research? That's always a big concern with, not only universities, but private industry as well.
Yeah, so I'll speak to the privacy thing first. So Stargaze is modular and by nature, both as a product, but also in how the data is structured. So when we work with a certain enterprise customer, all the data that we have in their license is scoped to them, and only users of that license have access to it. No one else has access to anything that's derived from it, whether it's data they provide to us as a part of it, whether it's a faculty file or anything else, or any feedback they've shared on results or fine-tuning of models that have happened. Everything is scoped to them and them only. So you never have to worry about you sharing feedback and improving a model, and then one of your competitors sort of reaping the benefits of that because of the way that we've designed the plumbing under the hood. To your first question, interoperability is tricky with these data sets. I think there's a lot of companies that are working on this. I mean, you see Dimensions, you see Lens, you see OpenAlex to some degree, and many others try to basically resolve people across publication data, across patent data, across grant data. My general view is that there isn't a one-size-fits-all or best approach. I think it's always sort of going to have some level of an error rate in this process because the data is just fundamentally imperfect. And so when you're in that environment, the principle is, how do you tell the user like how this actually happened, right? So if they look at something and they're like, actually, that's wrong, how do you give them a way to correct that? And how do you give them a way to understand why it happened? So it's not so much of a black box where it's a binary trust or don't trust decision, because if that's the setup, you're never going to trust it, at least in my experience, especially when you're selling to PhDs and anyone who's highly, highly educated and highly, highly skeptical. And so to me, that's always this it's a very asymptotic journey towards getting it perfect. But in a lot of cases, you can get really, really far. I will also say up front that the resolution of, for example, a person within just like one type of data set, whether it's publications or patents, even that is like imperfect because people's names changes, they get married and so on. And so there's a lot of like fundamental issues there. So we have historically, to solve this problem, relied on interpretable public infrastructure. So one thing we did was used OpenAlex as a way to say, this is a record of a person, and you can see how this came about, and we're not going to kind of turn this into this opaque system that you have to trust. And then as we think about layering in other data sets, it's been an ongoing process of enriching information about people. So not just names, but where they've worked, what companies they've started, the sort of areas of interest in the body of work for that record across data sets, to then over time say, these two things are linked over time. And we've got some tricks up our sleeve to make that problem a bit more tenable to solve. But that's generally how we think about it. It's, okay, you have this paper, you have this patent. How do you tie the people behind it to then link them properly together?
Well, I'm curious, Ashish, what trends in AI and machine learning are you most excited about for advancing Stargaze's capabilities, particularly in some of the emerging fields like generative AI or predictive analytics?
I think the rate of the rate of innovation in the last year, 6 months, 2 weeks, it's crazy.
It
Honestly,
seems like
right?
every day, to be honest.
It's been awesome to watch these foundational models improve. It's been awesome to see all these different techniques that people are building off of reasoning models to solve age-old problems in their space in really, really new and exciting ways. When we talked about Stargaze historically, I would say that a lot of our initial positioning in the context of AI and machine learning has been this very quantitative, data science heavy approach to understanding innovation. And what I mean by that is really leveraging classic machine learning techniques in a very sophisticated way to say, this is how we can think about innovation and trends in innovation quantitatively. And that was really pushing the old, I guess, methods or systems to their limit from a data science perspective. But the thing I've always been wrestling with in my head is, are those really going to last when we have reasoning models that are just trained on insane amounts of data that are just going to know the right thing? And all of this work is sort of washed away and moot because you ask something a question and it gets to the right answer anyway. And so that's where a lot of my internal excitement and focus has been, is how do we leverage that in a way that minimizes things like hallucinations and still maintains the level of trust you need in a reliable tool. And so I can share a couple things here that we've been experimenting with internally, where we use language models to tag information about papers or data. We use them to generate, or experimenting with using them to generate knowledge graphs to create clusters of information around papers that we can then use to say, here are sort of facts or knowledge units about the innovation activity here that we can then turn into embeddings or even just feed into a reasoning model to ground its reasoning in how it searches for innovation or how it recommends potential people as connections. Steve, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that.
I think that when we're thinking about the synergies versus the risks to our core business, we have to think about both of those. Of course, if you could just type a question into a chat bot and it gives you the answer, and you can do that in a generalized way across any data set, then essentially every software and every analyst and all of us are essentially moot. And there are pictures of what that looks like. I think that the angle that we've taken is that you can capture the most exciting components of those innovations, and you can feed them into data sets and data structures that you own and can shape. And you can give it your way of thinking in a way that's going to really allow you to create a competitive edge while also harnessing all the new stuff that's coming out. And that's the way that we've been trying to build.
It's going to be really exciting to see, as things change daily in AI, how exactly Stargaze improves here on out. So I'm sure you guys are having a lot of fun tinkering with that as well. For listeners to this podcast who might be in a tech transfer office, and perhaps they're thinking based on our conversation that they're interested in piloting Stargaze, what are some of the first steps you recommend that they take, and how does Portal help support implementation of Stargaze?
So 2 things here. First, folks can start using Stargaze right away. So we have a tool called Stargaze Network. You can go to stargaze.portalinnovations.com and click sign up. And there are ways for you to get involved and start using Stargaze immediately. Start conducting searches. Right now, Stargaze Network is in private beta as of May 27th, 2025. But it's going to continue to, as we move it along, it's going to continue to improve. And folks can get started right in Stargaze Network. What it will do is ask you information about what you're looking for. It'll build a picture of your innovation neighborhood, and then it'll give you access to Navigator, which is our core tool for being able to search for innovation within your university around any innovation context. And so you can just get started today. And that's on our free layer. If you're interested in going deeper and looking at customized maps of your innovation ecosystem or putting more powerful tools in the hands of your investigators, you can just reach out to either Ashish or me. There's a bunch of different ways to get a hold of us. Stargaze at portalinnovations.com. You can email either of us directly. Those are really just easy ways to engage with us. And then the other thing that we're doing with Portal is Power by Portal, which is essentially a playbook that we have where we take all of the Portal ecosystem, not just the bits, but also the atoms, the people and the infrastructure and all of our network, and bring that into a university context. And so you can go beyond Stargaze to a deeper engagement with Portal through the Power by Portal offering that we have.
Like we love joining calls with folks who are toying with the tool and helping them make the most of it, but also understanding what we can build on top of it. So, we're not too worried about taking up our time to meet with folks and learn more about how they're using it.
So, Ashish, I want to ask you, for institutions with limited IT resources, how user-friendly is Stargaze's interface, and what training does your team provide?
Yep. So I would say it's very user-friendly. And I say this because from the outset, as excited as Steve and I are about the data science part of it, our innovation biomarkers, thinking about AI toolkits and really using these tools, we did not historically start out as a software company building in isolation. We started out within the context of Portal, where we knew firsthand what problems people were facing. And so top of mind for us was, these are our users, and we want to build something that is useful for them. And AI or not, I think that any time you build a tool, it has to be straightforward, simple to use, and reliable, where it doesn't change out from under you in ways that you don't expect, which I think is a criticism, quite candidly, of a lot of other AI-first tools that are out there. And a lot of the feedback we've gotten from folks has been in that line. It's not just easy to use, but it's a joy to use, right? It's visually appealing. It looks nice. Everything is sort of where it is. Things feel fast and snappy. And so we've had pretty good feedback there, even from our initial closed beta days. As far as rollouts, again, to my point earlier, we want to make sure it is useful. And part of that means getting it over the finish line in terms of rolling it out. So we work with everyone on an individualized basis to make sure that, we are rolling it out in the way that makes sense for them and the way that they're set up. So sometimes that is getting a small group of folks onboarded over a couple of weeks, doing kickoff calls, trainings, biweekly check-ins, and then giving them the resources they need from PDFs and videos to distribute among the larger team with slightly less frequent calls on our side, to something that's a bit more specific. Really, we don't really take a one-size-kind-of-fits-all approach here. It's very much, okay, we said we were going to build this thing to solve someone's problem. We built it. Now let's make sure it's in their hands and they know what to do with it and that everyone's happy.
So, Steve and Ashish, thank you so much for spending time with us today, talking about this really powerful AI tool, Stargaze, and how it's helping universities navigate the funding challenges that they have now and helping them uncover all kinds of hidden opportunities in their research ecosystems.
Thanks for having us on, Lisa.
Great chatting with you, Lisa.
Steve and Ashish, thank you for illuminating how Stargaze is transforming innovation discovery in an era of tightening budgets. Your work empowering universities to see the unseen in their ecosystems offers a roadmap for sustainable research commercialization. For our listeners, explore Stargaze's public modules at portalinnovations.com/Stargaze. Keep building the future.
Thanks for listening to Autumn on the Air with Lisa Mueller. Get social with us and share your thoughts. You can tweet us at AUTM or visit us online at autm.net. We'll be back next week on the air. Be sure to join us.